right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inner Join. This is a show where we dive deep into the world of data governance and data management. I'm your host, Shinji Kim, founder and CEO of SelectStar. SelectStar is a data discovery and governance platform with an automated data catalog, lineage, and documentation. So today I'm very excited to have Ross Helenius from Mimecast. So please just comment on the chat if you have any questions for us during the show. And Ross, welcome to Inner Join.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your role at Mimecast and what Mimecast does.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at Mimecast for about 3 years now. And I actually came in to run the analytics engineering team for most of my tenure here. I've been overseeing and help building up the analytics engineering infrastructure. That's got all the, things that you would think about in the modern data stack as we made our transition into cloud-based technologies, adopting tools like dbt and Snowflake to try to help speed up and make more robust pipelines and deliver more value more data that could unlock value. And more recently, we formed a new team within Mimecast under the business transformation office, which is AI transformation. And we're really focused on and thinking about how we use AI to drive outcomes, create leverage within the business, and ultimately make everybody more productive through the use of AI technology. And in my current role, I oversee the AI engineering and architecture aspects of that. So trying to think about how we create the best, profile of systems and infrastructure in order to support, obtaining those outcomes.
Amazing. Can you share also a little bit more about what Mimecast does for the audience?
Absolutely. Key part I left out here. So we're a threat protection company, right? And we try to help people, stay protected where they work. And that can be a lot of different angles of how we do that. One of the most popular threat vectors is email, right? So we have a lot of security solutions around making sure people stay safe in their email communications. But there's also a bunch of other different products and solutions out there that can, as communication grows and evolves and people do more communication on different platforms like Teams and Slack and all these other places. How do you help keep that protection where people are taking their communications? And then also how do you protect the people that work there too? How do you manage the human risk element as well? And Mimecast has been around for a long time. The co-founder was one of the pioneers in the sort of email space, and it's a 20-year technology company. So it's a great place to be.
Very cool. I guess there's a ton of relevance into AI, especially, since you guys do a lot of work in communication then. Tell us a little bit more about how you personally got into data and how you ended up at Mimecast.
Yeah. So I've had a very long, sort of windy relationship with data in my career, and really have been in data and analytics for almost all of it in various facets. I'd say when I really started to get involved with a career in data was I started training healthcare providers on how to use like medical records software, and that was when there was a big push to digitize medical records. Sort of take that for granted now, but the vast majority not that long ago was on paper, and there were physical records moving back and forth. And through the wave of this digital shift, there was all these new things that came up. So I started new jobs and functions that came up. So I started training people on how to use the software, and then eventually I went into, well, how do we configure the software? How do we make it communicate through interfaces and send data back and forth? And ultimately, the most interesting place I found was like, what do we do with all that data now that it's digitized? Like, you can answer a whole bunch of questions that you couldn't answer before. You can do things better at scale, both small and large. You can influence patient outcomes. You can make a nurse's day better by helping them get through tasks more efficiently, et cetera. And it was a hard change to go through for a lot of folks, but it was really sort of eye-opening from the possibilities and outcomes that you could now drive from having this wealth of data. So I think that's really kind of what got me hooked. And I've been in the healthcare space for a while after that, and did various roles from product management to building analytics solutions full scale and sort of embedded analytics solutions in some various places, and really enjoyed the data and analytics space, both the pace of innovation, the impact that it could have on business outcomes, like all that was really kind of hooked me in. And Mimecast was a bit of a pivot because I had been in healthcare for so long, and I was in my most recent job before this was building analytics products for a healthcare firm that was selling them to clients and using that modern data stack. So using Snowflake, using DBT, using those tools to build the solutions. And Tim Siemens at Mimecast had found me and said, "Hey, do you want to come, work at Mimecast and do this analytics engineering role here?" And I was really excited to sort of shift a little bit. I'm a firm believer that these sort of forced moments of growth, like when you take on a new expansion, is like really good from a personal level. When you branch out into somewhere and learn something new, it's a little bit of drinking from the fire hose at the start, but it makes you, you know, learn new things and take on new challenges. So I find that exciting.
Yep. Growth is not comfortable.
Correct.
That's awesome. Cool. So our main topic here today is called Unlocking the Value of Data and AI. You personally run a podcast called Unlocking the Value of Data and interview other data founders and folks in the industry. And I thought you'll have a really interesting point around, and with your new role, how companies and how you are currently using AI for data and also data for AI. So I would love to dive into those. I see a question that if there is a slide deck that's getting presented. I don't think we don't have any slide deck slides, but we are going to be primarily talking through the specific topics. So if you have any questions, please add to the comments and just stay tuned. Cool. So I would love to learn a little bit about how at Mimecast you guys are utilizing AI to clean, organize, or enhance data for utilizing for Mimecast products and business today?
Yeah. Um, it's a great question. There's been a proliferation of the ability to inject AI into all different places in the analytics workflow. And we're not that far away from a place in which AI really meant like machine learning or data science models. And that was like pretty much the extent of how AI, if you go back maybe 5, 10 years ago, it was like that means you put a data science model into play and you spit out some predictions or whatever. Now AI is like everywhere, and every tool, everything that you see, everybody's got some kind of AI facet to it. And the key is to find like the effective ways to deploy AI to create leverage within your data. And the nice thing about it is that like it definitely helps in all kinds of different places today. So if you think about it, the role of even if you kind of like, let's work from the pipeline back to front a little bit, in the ingestion side of the data now, it used to be people were like trying to find anomalies in pipelines. Users were reporting anomalies. Like it was very manual, very tedious thing to do to even just say like, does my data look right today? Right. And now we have all kinds of AI solutions that can deploy on top of that for observability and say, what should you care about? When should you care about it? What's a true anomaly? What's like a anomaly that's maybe not as severe? And so you get much better monitoring from those AI models in the ingestion side of the world to help you triage, and spend less time there trying to sift through that manually, or have your users report it to you, which is bad from a trust perspective. And as you move up the chain and you think about now you're starting to model data, like you've got your data ingested, maybe you landed in a lake and you start to model your data. AI is helping you curate and cleanse that as well now too. So if you think about like you may use everybody's going to have a different stack out there, but I'll pick on a popular tool for a moment like DBT. DBT now has some built-in AI features that help with the cleaning and organization and the discovery of data with things like DBT Copilot, which can now help you generate documentation for those data sources automatically, can help you embed, tests within there, so you can run additional tests while you're modeling. And that helps users discover the data, right? If you have nice, clean, well-documented models, people can interact with those models easier. And then enhance is like another big category too. Enhance takes on a bunch of different facets. You could do that traditional like data science model where maybe you're making predictions or you're classifying things and using AI to do that in ways that traditional data modeling can't do. But we're also in this whole new frontier of mixing in generative AI into your data pipelines to create even more possibilities of what you can do with your data. And I think in the realm of unstructured data, we're really unlocking unstructured data in a way that wasn't possible before in various ways, right? And that's both from taking unstructured data, synthesizing it, condensing it, like maybe getting an answer out of it, maybe running a sentiment across it, and these are all kind of mixed in your data pipeline. So it's a maybe a long-winded way of saying like it's everywhere now. Like AI participates in every point of the data process and chain from the ingestion to the outputs on the analytics side, and that velocity is only going to increase like as we continue to see solutions in the space over time. So it's really kind of mind boggling to think about the progress that's been made in the past few years in this respect.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there were two parts that I thought was really interesting that you mentioned, which actually are both related to unstructured data. One part was about the ingestion. So you were saying that the traditionally, like looking at some of the anomalies or something like that detects right at when the source data comes in. Maybe for you guys, it might be an email. For that to be like detected, is the Gen AI side just much faster, would you say? Or just brings out a lot more context about the file or the source data you're looking at?
Yeah, so I think of these as like tools in the toolkit, right? And like Gen AI is a tool, and traditional classification or algorithms or tools, like traditional unit tests or tools, they're all tools, right? And they have different attributes of like speed, which may equate to like performance. It might be the flexibility of the things that it can perform. And so it's always about like the right tool for the right task, right? And I think like when you mention Gen AI, it's got like a much broader profile of capabilities I can do. Like we haven't had quite the Swiss Army knife of like generative AI in a data pipeline that we had before. And I think people are still trying to wrap their heads around like, what does this do? Like, what can it do? And that's kind of mind boggling, right? It's really good at synthesis. It's really good at some of these other things. You can interact with it, which is like a thing that you couldn't really do in depth before. But then other times you might be looking for like a very small scope thing and you need really, really fast performance. And like cost is another factor too. And maybe it's more expensive to make an LLM call and it takes 10 seconds to do some sort of detection or classification or a function here. And maybe you want like a really well-tuned Python script that like is super performant, or maybe you're like hyper tuning into like Rust or Go, or you're like getting really deep into the performance layer. So these are all these kinds of trade-offs. But the thing that's great in my mind is you have more choices, right? So you can
Hmm.
solve more problems. You're just sort of making decisions about which one is the most appropriate there.
Yeah, for sure. And then on the data classification front, were you guys like using kind of like more like on traditional ML models in the past? And is it switching to like AI? Like how was that process like and kind of the benefits?
Yeah, and I'll talk about it from the business side. A lot of times we drive like sort of the business outcomes piece of
Mm-hmm.
it, and how do we help the business become more productive. And I think that for sure we are using more generative AI by the nature. It like if you were to look at the mix, because it's now a capability and because you can do so much with it, that's just growing, right? And the places that you want to deploy that and the value that you want to create from that. So it's like any space that now is new space. You're gonna like jump into that space, fill out, what is the value I can get out of this? But it doesn't mean that you stop doing your traditional like transformations and your traditional modeling aspects. It means you combine them both, right? And so I see us more and more saying like, hey, what additional things can we get out of this data that we have now? And in the unstructured world, that's a whole ton of new things. So, right. So we're saying like, hey, can we create new, even things like, can we create a new feature out of unstructured data to make it structured, to feed it back in? And we sort of have these like hybrid pipelines now, right? Where the world of like traditional data modeling of like the Kimball model and like the highly structured model is getting blended in with this like, hey, now I have a ton of like more free text, unstructured data that I can actually decide, do I want to synthesize it? Do I want to structure it more? Do I want to keep it unstructured, et cetera? Figuring out how those new tables fit together to feed into analytics and outcomes to say like, maybe, maybe I want to create a table that's like a hyper personalization table on the customer level that contains traditional, sort of demographic attributes from an analytic perspective, but now it also contains a bunch of generative AI attributes around, different things I can make about the customer. What's their sentiment, and how did our last conversation go, and what things did I promise to follow up on? And then even bringing more like dynamic generative AI on top to say like, how do I create hyper personalized, you know, outcomes and feedback for this customer because I can blend all this stuff together, right? So I think that's it. If it hasn't changed the way that people think about analytics, they haven't got deep enough into it yet. They haven't expanded into the technology enough to consider, because I really think it's a pivotal moment for us in this space.
For sure. So it's not really just like one to one, do the same thing but like faster or cheaper or better quality. It's really just expansion of variety of things that you are going to be seeing that you didn't even know about or thought about before, because like Gen AI will bring all these new attributes that and ideas that you can actually drill down on, especially on the unstructured data side. I
Exactly.
completely, yeah, see that. Now I'm curious, like, what are some of the lessons that you can share from using all of these AI to manage the pipelines and doing the classification and all of these on data? As you're thinking through, we do actually have a question who has asked about how to deal with data quality
Yeah.
for the results of the LLM, because I think it's also a very valid point that there is a lot of different things we can do. But if it's not doing it at the standard or at a
Yeah.
certain level, then you probably won't be able to trust it and it's not going to be useful at all.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a huge piece of it. There's multiple things to consider here. Sometimes people think like generative AI and LLMs are magic, right? And you just sort of like, now I can do anything, right? I can ask any question, like doesn't matter whether data exists or not. Like it's just gonna solve all my problems, right? And that's the fallacy that I think people fall into sometimes. Nothing has changed about the fact that you still need quality data to feed into an LLM. You need to make sure that like you're confident in that data is well governed, that's a high quality data. And even though LLMs can take some, freedom in the way that they answer questions, if the source of what you're trying to ask doesn't exist in your data, you will not be able to get an answer for it. So like I just want to dispel the magic about LLMs out there from that perspective for a second. So, well, what can you do? You still do your traditional data practices, right? Like monitor all the things that are coming in, and even do that from an unstructured perspective. Like, did I get my call transcripts today? And are they in a good format and all that kind of stuff? So that's some of the basics. But then I think there are a couple other things you can do. There's the LLMs themselves. Like, are you using the LLMs properly in the way that you want? So if you have this can come down to a couple things. Is the model that you're using appropriate, right? We have all these different choices from OpenAI and Anthropic and Google about LLMs that you can use, and they all have subtle differences. How many tokens can they take in? What are they specialized on? That kind of stuff. So there's picking the right model. There's also the like temperature of a model and these different parameters that you can tweak on an LLM to say, do I want you to be really deterministic in your results? Like, am I asking you to do very factual things, and I don't want you to like hallucinate and make up a bunch of stuff so you can dial your temperature settings down there? If you want it to be really creative, you can. Providing it high quality instructions, like what is it exactly that you want the LLM to do? Are you going to give example output templates, etc.? Like that can all help control. And then there are some techniques out there for monitoring the results of an LLM. If you're doing some factual stuff like, hey, if I'm asking you to tell me, did this customer experience an issue in X realm, right? Different platforms like Snowflake and different places have places where it can give you confidence scores, right? Based against what question did you ask in the LLM? What did the LLM respond with? And how confident in an interval was the response there? So I think it's a fantastic question. I think it's going to continue to evolve, right? And one of the things that is fundamental to this that piece is trust. Do you trust a LLM, an agent, etc., to perform the task? And some of that is just exposure and hands-on time too. So the last piece is like you have to get the users used to interacting with the LLMs, understanding the responses, and getting comfortable with the fact that like nothing's perfect. Humans aren't perfect, but we give them a lot more like trust in a situation than we do for an LLM. And we have this expectation that LLMs are going to be perfect all the time. So I think some of it is just exposure of folks understanding what LLMs are, how they perform in certain tasks. Is this saving me time? Is it giving me better results? Is it 90% of the time? Like that's fantastic, right? If you can get that sort of that high. So I know there's a lot of things to consider there, but it's a really, really interesting place.
Yeah, and I think unstructured data just by nature does not have a always like a defined criteria to put in the data quality checks. Like you can't just do like a nulls or uniques and run through those as the monitors. So it's almost like would you like it like would you say is it more about the evals that you set up for the quality you want to measure, or are there any particular things that you would recommend to put in as monitors for any like unstructured data, assuming that this is like still like a text data?
Yeah. So I still am a fan of like freshness and like structural checks. Like you'd be
Mm.
amazed by how many times like you get unknown characters like UTF-8 violations or like some weird thing that happens on like your pipeline breaks. But from there, like those are the traditional checks. And then I think from there you've got to figure out like how you want to model your data to get to like it to me it becomes sort of purpose driven after that, right? Like if you do your basic sort of like quality checks, the next piece becomes often how you refine that data or like select portions of that data or splice up that data to get sent down in the pipeline to where you want it to do some other kind of function, right? So like if you have a giant call transcript, you might be saying like extract the context from here, like who was on the call. You
Yeah.
might say like rate the overall sentiment of this call, right? You might say like generate a list of follow-ups, some of which you just need portions of it or pieces of it. And you're going to want to have some kind of process, right? Like, let's say if you're extracting contacts, you might do an additional check that says like, hey, are these people in Salesforce or not? Right? Like, and to say like, hey, I can either match it or maybe it's a net new contact that I don't have captured yet, et cetera. So I think like these are the areas that we're going to start to like refine and explore more. It's like, what does it mean to bring in an unstructured data, integrate it back into different workflows, and have confidence in that? So I think it'll continue to evolve.
Yeah, for sure. There's another comment here regarding kind of like the data attribution and enrichment for AI. And I think this kind of also goes not just as the use case for AI, but in terms of the way that you should use AI so that like any like predefined specific business glossary terms or something that's relevant to the business can be actually picked up directly from that unstructured data. I think the part that you mentioned about like pick up like any context or like
Yeah.
what this like sentiment is, or does it talk about XYZ like type of, things to be part of the prompt, I think is important.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And I think attribution is one of those things that goes back to that trust, right? And you see this come up if you use model providers in the web interface and they go out and they find information, you'll find the little like footnote that you can click on. I think it's a really important thing to do like in your business use cases, both from a developer perspective and from a, user consumption perspective. If I tell you that these three people were on a call or the customer mentioned a problem with X product, building in the attribution piece to say, hey, it came from this call and you can go find it here in Gong or your business system or whatever it happens to be. The user can then click it if they want to. If they want to say like, hey, I want to go verify this, they can click it. They can go through the call transcript and say like, yeah, I agree, or like, maybe I don't agree or whatever. But it just creates that level of trust. Or when we're building Gen AI models, like often what we'll do is we'll say to the LLM, we'll say like, pull out the text in which made you flag this concept and provide a snippet of proof. And so you can use those pieces of information to say like, very quickly, like, yeah, I think the LLM is classifying this correctly or incorrectly, along with that score, right? So when I mentioned before, like, imagine you have a row that's like, user mentioned an issue with X product, right? Confidence score, snippet that you pulled out that made you flag that concept. You now have a really powerful, succinct data set to build that trust level.
For sure. Amazing. This actually gets us to our next topic, which is data for AI.
Yes.
Because we hear AI is only good as your data, and it is the foundation for making AI to not give you hallucination, give you the actual result that we want to get. So I think attribution definitely is one part of it. What are some other, I guess, critical aspects that you see for making sure that there's a good data quality exist for AI?
Yeah. Um, I think when you think about AI, and I'll talk about it from like maybe let's talk about like machine learning for a second, right? There are certain, and the same sort of things apply here that apply in the generative AI space too, which is like sometimes people think you can sit a machine learning model on top of data and like outcomes like magic, right? Magical predictions, like it's always right, like it's great. Um, you actually need, depending on like what you're trying to predict, you actually need a very robust data set for an ML prediction that depending on like your time of how you're trying to predict, I'll say like at minimum, you need like a year's worth of high fidelity data to make predictions that are going to hold up as far as the outcomes you want to see, the precision and recall and all that kind of stuff, right? To make sure you have a well performing model. And so you really need to understand the shape of your data, right? What is the am I getting good fill rates across these? Do I have a lot of nulls against these values? Is the distribution of this data inside? Do I have like invalid, values within here? All that kind of stuff. To say like I have a really high degree of confidence that, you know, this data set is going to support good predictions. And sometimes you get a disconnect between what the business thinks is going to be a really good data set. Hey, we have people like inputting this information. Why can't we use this in a predictive model? Well, it's like maybe a tenth of the people are following the process to click the field and put it in, and maybe it's only like filled out every third time. So you get into this issue that you have a very sparse data set in which you're trying to make really high fidelity predictions off of. So I think it's really important to understand what needs to go in to the process or the analytical tool that you're choosing in order to get high quality outputs out from that. And that can vary from what method you're trying to use. I think the nice thing is that you can get a bit more out of like the generative AI engines. This is not as stringent as like your traditional sort of AI ML models as far as the data needs from an input perspective. Even in sparse situations, you can still extract meaningful pieces of information. I think about like comments on surveys and things like that, where like if you can amass 100 or 200 of those, it might be far more powerful from trying to tell that customer voice story than if you had nothing, right, in that scenario. So I think it really depends, but basis of that is really just knowing what can I expect from an outcomes perspective based on what should I what kind of foundation do I need to have in place, right? You can't build your house on sand. You need a solid foundation and structure in place in order to get those outcomes you're looking for.
So, as someone who's running the AI transformation at the company and also had been overseeing like building out the data platform, analytics engineering platform, how do you today approach data governance? And are there any processes that you've implemented or instituted in order to get to that level of data quality for AI to build more of that AI power system?
Yeah. I'll say there's probably two important concepts in here from my perspective. There's a whole lot more we can do in the data governance space, but there are two concepts that really stand out in my mind. One is documentation and metadata, being able to expose that out for folks to be able to understand what exists for data in your ecosystem. And the other is creating robust lineage and participation in like a data mesh environment, right? So I'll put like lineage and metadata in one and data mesh in another. Um, and I think that the data mesh concept is something that people struggle with, but I think is really important from a governance perspective of there's often, different teams interested in building different analytics, like data sets, things to support their outcomes for their business. And that can get really messy really quick. And you can have a lot of like duplication of efforts, a lot of competing data models that like come up with different numbers and all that kind of stuff, where people are ingesting the same sources and doing it different ways. And so I think the evolution of data mesh is really important organizationally and then technically, right? How do you actually deploy an effective data mesh strategy is a tough concept, but it's getting better with some of the tools and technology out there. And one of the things that we've seen that's had success so far is like having a foundational sort of data ingestion point where a lot of the key like central corporate data is pulled into this foundation project and then can be referenced by sort of satellite areas or content places through things like public model references in DBT. So for all the DBT users out there, you could have multiple projects in a DBT project, and you can use this cross project reference. And from that foundational place, you can say, hey, I'm going to make my, you know, financial cube a public model that can be referenced by all these other projects, right? And that can contain, company revenue and different transactional items. And now you've relieved the burden for all these other teams to have to go build their own financial cube, right? And the risk in that is enormous, right? Because now like you come up with conflicting numbers, you can have different failure points in different places, and everybody's taking the overhead of maintaining that. So that's just one example where now when you extend that out and everybody gets to benefit from it, you give everybody time back by having a centralized team that can focus on that. The other piece is the metadata and the lineage piece, which also, we've had some great success in DBT through some of the Explore features that we use so far as our first stepping stone into that place of how do you also let the teams who are consuming, let's take that financial cube example for a second, when they have a question about what a column means, how do they get that answer quickly and how can they do it in a self-service perspective? And the first step for us was the Explorer, where they can now go back in, look at that cross project model ref, look at the code itself and say like, oh yeah, I can see it's, by this transaction type and it filters on these things. And they can get to that answer much more quickly rather than it having to be like, hey, I need to go back to that other team, like ask a question, maybe it bounces back and forth for a couple days, et cetera. There's definitely still scenarios in which you want to go talk to other teams, but I think setting up this using technology to help set up your, take the friction out of your infrastructure, create leverage for reusable assets wherever they exist is an important thing to consider and about like how do you continue to scale analytics is it's only going to increase. Analytics is not going to decrease. Going to get, the need to consume and build more is going to go up. So how do you not create a mess in that scenario?
Yeah, for sure. I think both are all really important points. As someone who's in the business of helping companies to get their metadata and documentation in place, it really resonates with me. So today, how do you guys ensure that there's good documentation on your models, if that is an area that you see as so important?
Yeah. So we make it like a requirement as part of our pull request that like any Mart facing layer has to have documentation go with it. Um, One of the nice things that we opted into and now I think is public release is like the DBT Copilot Gen AI feature within there. So you can click it now and it says like, it'll create your YAML file for you with some documentation on there, which is a nice addition. But then we have the developers go in and review it. So we put some like controls in place to say like, as part your pull request is not going to get approved for a Mart level model unless you have documentation. And there has to be that like, and we're not saying you have to do it for every like staging model or every intermediate thing, but you have to create a culture in which that's an important thing, right? Because it's often seen as like a tax or a burden on developers. Like, I just did all the code. Like, why can't people just reverse engineer? Like, aren't you a good coder? Like you get all this sort of things that people say in the sphere about like, documentation is like going to the dentist for people in the analytics space sometimes. But it's actually one of the most crucial components in my mind for when you onboard a new person, when you're extending out to your business community, like how do you give people the ability to understand what that thing means to you and how you're the expectations of how you're going to use it.
Yeah, I mean, now with LLM documentation is much easier, especially if you have the code. So, I mean, we see that it creates like a quite a good quality of documentation if you already had a good code in place. So it's not really the burden anymore. It's just more of making sure that it's in place and it's a process in the organization.
Yeah. And
Um,
the organization values it, right? It really comes back to that. Whatever an analytics organization values is what people are going to do, right? So some of it's the culture of the team and the things that they put into place. And uh, I also try to put it back on the team as well to say like, there's often this like false choice that people make that in a lot of different ways of like, if I just ignore this thing, it goes away. It's like, that's not how it works. If you ignore it, it comes back to you. In a different form though. So if I don't do documentation, what I have is 40 different Slack messages or end users saying like, I don't like, what is this thing? I don't understand it, whatever. I would much rather personally write a piece of documentation that can deflect 90% of that stuff. And even helps me. Like sometimes I'll go back into something and be like, what on earth was I doing here? I kind of like warm up my brain cells like okay I remember yeah but like why is that nuance in there um and so it's like it's like eating your vegetables right like it's good for you like you may not want to do it all the time but like exercising maybe like it's just going to be better in the long run and that's how I try to frame it to my like team members. Think about your future self a month 3 months 6 months down the road like what kind of things do you want to be dealing with what kind of things can we put in place? It's like same thing with like pull request standards, right? Like what kind of things do we want to put in here to try to make sure that when we put out code, it's high quality code and you don't have to come back and revisit it all the time. So I think it's kind of similar concept. So
yeah, and I think operationalizing it really helps so that it just kind of gets in
yeah,
the like a day in rather than I have to think about now the this documentation. Cool. There is an interesting question. I don't know if you have a good thought on this. If there are any tools that help speed up data modeling using AI, I think this could also you could also answer it in the perspective of like what processes or frameworks that you guys follow when because these data models, your TBT models, continue to evolve and continue to expand. So how do you like ensure that these are being done quickly, but also like making sure that it's in the standard and it's being done right if you want to reuse them and all?
yeah, it's an emerging thing right now. It's like there's no place that I'd say like, hey, there's like a shining example of like perfect modeling code because there's things to help. Because at the end of the day, data modeling is still an expression of business context, and it's the language of business. Like SQL is the language of business in a structured format against data, and there's so much nuance to that, right? There's so many little gotchas and things, and then you also tack on like the technical, right? Like how do I put business logic into context, but how do I make sure it's like really well performant and clean and all that kind of stuff? And I do think there's a lot of things evolving in the space for this. Like there's even the pieces that we just talked about, like what's related to that. Well, if I can automate like unit testing and documentation through Gen AI, like that gives me time back to spend in other places, like thinking about the business logic, the code or whatever. There are also tools that are directly trying to help code as well. And that, like again, DBT's got one of their own like code suggestion templates that's I think it was in preview last coalesce and is not sure where it's quite is on the roadmap. But there's also other tools like GitHub Copilot. There's Cursor, which is gaining steam and getting like really popular. These LLM coding assistants. Now, what I'll say about those coding assistants is that they're really good at highly trafficked code base. And what do I mean by that? Like stuff that's out on the internet. Like you want a Python like time conversion like function, like there's a million out those. So it's really good at that. When you start to get it in like SQL syntax, it can be good at. Um, you that then might get into nuances of like, is it Snowflake SQL? Is it Databricks SQL? And there might be some more stuff that has to wade through from a context perspective there. And then you get into your layer of your own business logic, right? So you're layering all these facets that make it more and more targeted as to like, what does good SQL mean from your perspective? Now, it doesn't mean that these tools can't help with that. They can like, hey, I want to write, like a SQL statement that's got 3 CTEs in it and uses the qualify function to get the latest like, rows for this section. It should overall do this, and you might get 70 to 80% of the way there, and you say like, cool, I'm going to take that. I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit it. I'm going to add more context to it or whatever. And sometimes that really helps. And sometimes you spend more time fixing that thing that you would have done if you had written it from the start. So we're at this spot in my mind where it shows a lot of promise. I think there's some really strong places where it can help speed up the workflow, but there's still work that needs to be done. And whether it's fine tuning, whether it's putting more like, context into these LLMs operating on your data set to understand it better. The context windows aren't big enough yet to like read your entire code base and understand all the nuance, but it's only going to get better, right? So my advice to people in this space is like, try it out. There's places that it works really well. There's scopes that it works really well for. It's not going to solve everything. It's not going to do everything for you. But the more you get used to it and understand the pros and cons of it now, the better off you're going to be when it does, start performing really well in greater scenarios. So that would be my
Yeah,
advice.
for sure. I mean, speaking of experimentation, another question we got was like how we think about which LLMs to use and benefits and drawbacks, because there are so many models out there. And is it like worth really going through each one of them, or like maybe stick with one and then see how that performs and just try to leverage it for other things?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really depends on the scenario, right? If you're asking for what's the best chocolate chip muffin recipe, like it probably doesn't matter which LLM you use. They're all going to give a um, fairly similar response. But as you get into more specialized scenarios, I think models are differentiated a bit already. One of the key areas is the context windows. So how much you can feed into an LLM and how much you can respond to in an LLM perspective can make a big difference between the scope of what you're able to give it. So like, some of the latest Gemini models have really big context windows and they're better at understanding like larger code bases. And then the models themselves can actually have specialties within them. So certain models might be better at coding, like the Grok model purports to be better at coding tasks, or like some will be better at language translation. And so there are, even though they can all give you a chocolate chip muffin recipe, there are differences into which these models are tuned, even though they all are large language models. The other piece is that like I think we're going to continue to see specialization, right? I think there's kind of two paths in my mind, right? We're going to go towards the march towards AGI, what that means, artificial general intelligence, of like essentially the emulation of like a human thought. And so you're going to continue to go like larger and larger to try to get to that path. But I think there's other path is going to be like, that's great. Like, I don't need somebody who can code and give me chocolate chip muffins. Like, I just want something that's really good at coding, right? And so we're gonna continue to see these. And then maybe it's like, I want something that's better at Python, or I want something better at C sharp or Java or whatever. Like, so I think we're going to continue to see these specializations of, maybe smaller, more specialized language models. So it's so context dependent. And then there's
Yeah,
also like privacy concerns, like which LLMs can give you like non-share, non-data retention agreements, non-share agreements to make sure that you're doing it in a secure way as well, which is really important, right? I think everything's vacuuming up all this data, and we're pretty lax on like privacy regulations and everything as the space continues to evolve, and legislation hasn't caught up at all yet. It's another area of like, it's going to be fantastic growth and velocity in here. I mean, a lot of choices. So
for sure. Comes back down to the use case that you're trying to deploy AI for. Amazing. I just realized we only have 10 minutes left. I do want to make sure that I cover this question, which is,
yeah,
can you share some examples of a business outcomes that at Mimecast that were directly driven by AI?
yeah. So I'll talk about maybe our most sort of recent project from the business side, which has been a labor of love with myself and the team here, which has been our expansion AI um, model, and that's really how we're going to make our reps better and more productive at selling some of these products into our customer base. And the goal from this was to try to say, how do we take a whole bunch of information that lives in different places and condense it down to a small package of what is really critical for somebody to understand in that process about how to position products, how to sell into the customer base. How do we deliver that in their workflow as well? And so we used all the tools in our technology stack. We had to partner with the business. We had to come up with a thesis. We had to figure out what all the data was that we wanted to gather and collect around this in order to get to that outcome. We had to spend a lot of time on it, enabling the users, tracking success and outcome. And the great thing about it is like, in the first couple of months, we set out some targets that we thought were going to be, like achievable. And the way that we looked at it is like, we want people adopting the tool, right? We want people to find value in it. If people aren't using the tool, then you just built, something that of no value. We wanted to be able to track the outcomes from a business perspective, because it's really important to say like, AI products can be the most accurate, like fancy, technically awesome things in the world. If they don't influence a business outcome, like, it's a colossal waste of time and energy. So we also track the outcomes perspective of like, how much pipeline are we generating? How much business are we actually closing against this stuff? And the great thing was, as we beat all of the targets that we set out, prior to the horizon of time that we set for it. So on each one of those things, like the user adoption, the pipeline being generated, the amount of business being closed, we met all those targets in a faster timeline than we thought we would. And that's a super satisfying thing, both from from a developer perspective of like, hey, the thing that we built is useful. People are finding utility in it. They're driving their workflows from it. They're driving the way that they operate their day from it. And also the business is getting out of it, you know, what we wanted to, right? And even exceeding that. So that's one of my favorite examples so far. And it takes a whole ton of teams and people in order to be able to accomplish that. That's not just a data team, thing that you do.
That's awesome. So what's the part around the data that you guys enabled for the sales reps?
Yeah. So we essentially created like, I'll go into the technology stack a little bit. There's a Tableau dashboard that got embedded into Salesforce that essentially like lets our customer development reps see their book of business, see all of their customers, prioritize them by their propensity, to buy our products. And then on a deeper dive, go in and provide drivers around why we think those products are a good fit for that customer, and enable the reps to like take all this information that was like all these different places. They had to manually like maintain spreadsheets or figure out like, is this a good fit, not a good fit, whatever. I put it all right in their fingertips inside of a workflow right in front of them in order to be able to drive those outcomes. And on another note, it was like we thought it was so great, we submitted it to Tableau Conference for a speaking session. So it's actually going to be one of the topics there at Tableau Conference in next month if anybody's heading there and wants to catch some more in depth around it as well.
Exciting. So it's the AI part is basically utilizing both the information from Salesforce about the account and also kind of like coming up with its own recommendation or cues that are relevant for the sales rep to be aware of.
Yeah, it's a great. Let me clarify that. So from an AI perspective, we're doing our predictions, right? Our classical. It's a blend of different AI technologies into this user tool. We're doing predictions against accounts and products to say like where do we think it's a good fit, so then they can use that to arm themselves. But then we also bring generative AI into the workflow to say, hey, if you click here, you can go get a summary about this customer that has all the information about them for the past 12 months based on our interactions of like, hey, what's the overall theme here? What's the customer sentiment? What things have they been talking about? How do they think about the product, et cetera, et cetera? And we call it like the front page of the newspaper, where in 60 seconds you can read through whether you're on the account or you're a manager, like trying to catch up to speed, or you just inherited this account from somebody else. And then we're also branching out with the generative AI technology to be even more assistive in the workflow to say, like, hey, if you want to draft an email to request a meeting, we can do that for you. We can take all these relevant pieces of information, the drivers, the stuff we know about account, create that first draft email and let you edit it, tweak it, send it off. So we're really trying to say like the driving force behind this is how do we make reps more productive? How do we give them more time back to continually focus on the higher value things?
Yep, for sure. I think that's a great use case. Thank you for sharing that example.
Yeah.
Awesome. I guess one last question for you is what are you most excited about trying out with all the innovations that's coming out around the data ecosystem today? You already mentioned enough about DBT, so I know that you're excited about the Copilot. Tell
Yeah,
me
yeah.
something else more.
Yeah. God, there's so many things that I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about the evolution of the LLM models. And we've got some really powerful tools right now with these LLMs and the things that they have exposed to us and the different things they can do. But just seeing the pace of change, like the velocity of development against these LLM models is amazing, right? And you see all these things come out. You know, the voice assistant for ChatGPT was like, you know, amazing when it came out. I sat down with my kids and I'm playing board games and they're asking rules about I don't know. And so we turn on the voice assistant and they're just chatting with it. Oh yeah, you can do this. You can do that during your turn, right? And you've got all these code assistants and analytics assistants coming out of Claude and Anthropic. So I'm super excited to see the evolution of LLMs and just the possibilities of where we can take it. Again, with that, like, how can we all become more efficient, get more out of our day, focus more on value, and continually, like, you know, raise the bar for what it means to be able to unlock the value out of our data.
Amazing. I think I can't wait to try it out with my kid one day. Oh, that's a really great wrap for the show. Thank you, Ross, for being here. And anyone that's still here listening, check out Ross's podcast, Unlocking the Value of Data. It's a great podcast. And if you're going to Tableau conference, check out his session for sure.
Thanks
Thanks,
for
Ross.
having me,
Have a good
Shinji.
weekend and talk to you soon.
Sounds good.